is not so much in the context of writing, because you're the writers, but basically pretty much how to get the product on the air. That's what we're going to go for. So I really feel, and of course, guess who had to write a script for this too? So, and after this, I've got a handout. I got a handout for you that I'm going to go over, so you can take a look on the organization of a typical network and submission to the networks. But anyhow, here's my script. I feel very honored to be here today and to pass along whatever I can to help you with your writing journey. It's not how to write, like I said, but the mechanics of how to get your projects hopefully on the air. I do have a lot of respect for writers because my wife is a writer, okay? That's why I have a lot of respect for her. She got her PhD in creative writing in Great Britain a few years ago, and after graduation, I got curious and I read about 10 pages of her thesis and I got a headache. It's something else. It's beyond that. I'm lucky to get a bachelor's degree, but you know, one of those things. So shortly after graduation, she published a book about growing up in Hollywood. Sometimes we call it Holly Weird. And this was in the 60s, and it was all about growing up there with what we still kind of talk about, drugs, sex, rock and roll. Now we're shifting gears. We're a little bit older, and now she's writing children's books for our 2 little grandkids, so that's a shift, okay? So I have a story to tell you about the writers. When my wife was getting her MFA in writing in English at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, she called me up. She was very ill. She'd gotten something called epiglottitis, where you could barely breathe. And so she was sent to an emergency room, and they were going to do a tracheotomy on her. When she could get her breath, they asked her the usual questions, and one of them was, where does your husband work? And she says, NBC. And with that, the emergency room doctor goes in the other room, comes back, and puts on her chest his script. And gives it to her and says, here, I want your husband to read it. So, and then he goes, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. I wonder why, but whatever, this is where you kind of run into. So, now a little bit about myself, as Mike kind of alluded to. I retired from NBC after 50 years. That's a pretty long time. And then when my farewell memo to all my colleagues and stuff, everybody kidded me if I started at NBC in the silent era. I said, no, it's black and white. So, can you remember some of that? Also, while that was going, concurrently, I retired from the Army Reserve. I was in it for 30 years, or 33 years, and after my last assignment, I was activated for Operation Desert Storm. I think you all remember that. But I was assigned, I never left Los Angeles, I was assigned as the Deputy Commander for Operations for Armed Forces Radio and TV. And probably one of the best assignments, even for my professional career, that I've ever worked with. Just an absolute pleasure working with all the people in the military to get shows and things over to the GIs, ladies, and everybody overseas. It's a real effort to do that. And we were just getting into the satellite era to do that during that time period. I'm also currently a lecturer, which is a very fancy word for adjunct professor in the Cinema and Television Arts Department at Cal State Northridge. I teach 2 main subjects. One is television station operations, which I worked with KNBC for a long time. And the other one is called network practices. And people ask me, what exactly do you teach about network practices? And I said, well, it's an oxymoron. And they go, what do you mean? I go, television management. Think about that for a minute. So that's what I tend to do. I also tell my students, and they get a kick out of this, I graduated from the same college quite a few years earlier, and I said I graduated when we didn't have electricity and we had quill pens. But some of them actually believe it. But the best part I tell them is we could smoke in the classroom. You know, I don't know if any of you did it. And then I remember taking an exam, so I had my cigarette on the edge of the table, burn on it, little in the corner of it. Those things are completely over with. Can't do that anymore.
Thank God.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Mike. He and I were at NBC Page, as he mentioned, and we were just out of college. And we worked in television, which I guess you could pretty much call the golden age of TV. We were pages, and I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but pages in some context, people call it kind of like glorified gophers, you know, the gopher joke about go for coffee, go for this, go for that. So pretty much the same thing. We gave the tours, we seated the audience, we escorted talent to the airport, or whatever we were asked to do. Then as now, you can't get a job on the page staff unless you have a 3.2 GPA from college. And in some instances, even now, trying to get into the page staff, it's almost harder getting into, it's easier getting into Harvard than it is getting on the page staff. The other thing about the page staff is you had to have an agreement, like a contract, that if you didn't get off the page staff within a year, you were fired. Okay, you all heard that before, right? So, but basically, the whole idea was is they didn't want anybody being professional pages. They wanted you to get your job, get your gigs. And the whole idea as pages is that we would be assigned to different areas and try and eventually get a job in that particular area if that was the case. So as I mentioned, it was the golden age. Mike and I were assigned to the Dean Martin show, the Jerry Lewis show, and by the way, they were across the hall from each other. Remember that, Mike? They were across the Andy Williams show, the Johnny Carson show whenever he came to LA, and they did specials like the Elvis Presley show. That was a big one. So we would also man, as Mike mentioned to it, the artist entrance. This was the main entrance that all the talent would come through. And we would be assigned to whatever talent that came through to make sure that they got to the right studio. We carried their luggage. We did whatever we had to get them to the right place. But we did have some funny experiences, and I got to give you one. It wasn't with Mike, it was another friend of mine, Pages. We were working on and I hope you get a kick out of some of these. We were working on the Dean Martin show, and Jonathan Winters was going to be on that show. And my other friend and I, because we were answering phones and taking messages and stuff, and pretty much trying to keep the riffraff out of there. Jonathan Winters comes in, and oh, hello, Mr. Winters, how you doing? You know, just trying to be nice. And he's getting ready to do his show, and he picks up a trash can. And we're going, okay, what's this? And he starts talking into this trash can. Okay, I don't know if you've ever been around him at all, but you know, guys, he didn't have all his marbles, you know that, but he was funnier than hell. Okay. So he picks up the trash can and he goes, Fred, you still down there? And out of this trash can, which is his voice going, yeah, still here. And he goes, yeah, I know you've been stuck in the mine for several days now. And he says, listen, we finally got sponsorship for this. And the guy goes, okay. And again, he's doing both voices. He's doing the one out of the trash can. And my friend and I are just like, what's this? And so he says, yeah, it's a soup commercial. Now listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this can of soup. I'm going to pour it down this tube. And what I want you to do is put your mouth around the tube. And as soon as the soup comes down, I'm going to put the microphone, and it's just the two of us in the hallway. I'm going to put the microphone up to the tube, and you tell everybody at home how great the soup is. And then, okay. So he makes all these noises about opening up a can of soup and whatever, and he says, are you ready? And the voice goes, yeah, I'm ready. He goes, okay, here it comes. And he even makes the motion of pouring this mythical can of soup down the tube. And he goes, here it comes, and then out of the trash can comes, oh, son of a bitch, it's hot! He walked out and did his show. And it was just the two of us. It was just amazing. So this is sort of what we had when we were pages. Later on, I became a page supervisor that I used to order Mike around until he finally got off the staff. And then we would help develop page tours. They used to be free. And at that point, it was the page staff was all males. It was really boys town. And finally, when they started doing the tours, yeah, finally had to hire girls, and they were called guidettes.
Oh no!
Do you remember those things that looked like go-go shoes and boots? And
Guidettes.
Okay. They were guidettes. But here's the trick. Here's the one that was really interesting. They could only walk so many miles a day. It was a big studio. And they had to walk, there was no trams, we had to walk around the inside of the studio. And there was some law they could only walk so many miles a day. They had to have a pedometer on their foot to say, okay, I'm done, and just stop it in the road, or whatever. So after that job, I had quite a few ones. I ended up as an on-air coordinator, operations supervisor, film editing supervisor, production unit manager, sales administrator, and in my one of my last big jobs, I was director of on-air operations for the West Coast. And we had a release facility in New York at 30 Rock, and then we had the West Coast one in Burbank. And then at one point, they had to close it down. Everything now, and we'll talk about this a little more, was digital. And when I retired, I was the director of on-air program production. So how did my last job relate to what you guys are talking about? It's gonna be entertainment division and the development department. And if you know, the development department is the one that selects the dramas, the comedies, and the long form. Another name for long form, you guys would know, is called movies of the week or made for TV. So there's just little buzzwords that you're to be aware of. Let me take a little sip of water here. Wish I had a gin and tonic, but whatever. Okay, development department exists pretty much in all the networks and the major studios, Warner Brothers, Universal, Sony, no, except for NBC. NBC got rid of their department quite a long time ago. And I think you're aware of it now, that besides the major networks, there's a lot of competition, and you probably are all doing this now, called streaming. You've all heard of that, right? And I'm sure a lot of you are doing it. So the big players right now that are in the streaming business are Netflix and Amazon. And they are spending buku bucks, that's short for a lot of money, on product. And they're looking for product. And if you're looking to make a pitch, I would make a pitch and give you a heads up that that's a good place to try. Now, here's the trick. All the time I was at NBC, I was never in a pitch meeting, because I received what was from there, what came from that, the pitch meeting. I got the results of the pitch meetings by working with all the production companies after their pickup for a pilot was announced. It was my job to provide them all the documentation they would need to deliver their product to us, and never venture into a creative area. I never would ever get into a creative area. That's the job of the development people. I would never want to contradict anything that they would do. My job was to get their product pretty much on the air. Their job was to be creative. I don't give a damn who got shot. I don't care what door they went in out of, any of that stuff. But we had to make sure that the product was correct. It was too subjective. So basically, I would work with them on formats and delivery requirements. And for this, I was able to garner, the development department would ask during the pitch. So they have a term. I don't know if it's universal with all the networks or whatever, but at NBC, it was called T360. And what that was basically not just the pitch for the product, but guess what? Marketing, okay? They want to know it's marketing. So one of the first things they would ask for is the fact that you had more than just one script. They wanted you to have 6 scripts. Now, I don't know if any of you have run into this already, and you may have, but just one script doesn't do it. You have to have 6 scripts, at least if it's going to be a drama or something like that. They want to have an arc through there. The other one would be, and this is interesting, do you guys remember the series The Office? That was a rip-off from the one in England. In fact, when I saw the pilot for the American one, it was exactly the same thing as the English one. I mean, exactly the same verbiage and everything. But the big issue with The Office was marketing. And do you remember that character, Dwight? He was the guy with the glasses? Well, they had bobbleheads with Dwight, okay? Selling bobbleheads with Dwight. And the other one is that they would have T-shirts that would say Dunder Mifflin. What was Dunder Mifflin? Do you guys remember that from the series? That was the name of the paper company.
That was the company.
Okay, but do you see what I'm saying? So more than just the script, if you have an opportunity to put something together for the marketing and throw it on top of whatever you're writing, that's a plus. That's just something that's needed. Okay, and with this script, they also wanted to look, especially for dramas, what we call staying power. And you've probably all heard this before. Most dramas have an A and B story, okay? You have the main story and you got the backup. I don't know if you had it, probably watched, but this is really famous for it, was the one in Las Vegas where they did all the criminal stuff with those.
CSI.
I'm sorry?
CSI.
CSI. If you watch CSI religiously, like I did, you had the main one, but you had the backup one that was going week to week to week to week. You'd follow it through, and that kept you in the arc. Now, when they would do that with that pilot and keep going, the other thing is were you actually going to do or try and produce a pilot per se? Because a pilot is basically 2 times as if you would have it on the air. Another one is called a presentation. And I don't know if you've ever been through that, but a presentation is kind of a short version, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, to kind of give you a flavor for what's going to take place. That's the whole idea of what they're trying to do. Now, you're talking about trying to finance, right? A half-hour pilot, are you ready for this? You're all sitting down, costs $1 to $3 million. Everybody, okay, go get the vapors, I can tell right now. It's a lot of money. Of course, you know, you don't do this by yourself, you have to go to a major production facility to get this through. Now, there are several types of pilots, and I can give these to you. It's not just the one basically that you're gonna try and get tested. But there's a pilot called a backdoor pilot. There was that one, and again, that title escapes me, about this talking car. It was quite a few years
Knight
ago.
Rider,
What was it called? I'm sorry.
Knight Rider.
Knight Rider, okay, this talking car. That was a 2-hour movie of the week. And that eventually became a series that tested really well. So there's movies where this backdoor pilot is where it's usually gonna be a movie of the week. How did it go? How did it test? What were the ratings? And if they're pretty good, then you can pretty much be assured that you're gonna start moving on. There's another one called a put pilot, P-U-T, put pilot. And basically what that is it's guaranteed for air. You ready for this? But not guaranteed for series. And if you don't air it, then the company, meaning NBC, CBS, ABC, or whatever, has to pay a penalty. So there's a penalty associated with it. So, and what are you gonna do with just one show? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Another one you've probably heard of before is called a busted pilot. You produced it, it didn't get a pickup, but now you've done it, you paid the money, what are you gonna do with it? Well, what happens with busted pilots, for the most part, is they air during the summer. That's when you're all in the Hamptons, right? You go to the Hamptons and
Oh, yeah,
enjoy
of
yourself,
course.
you all do that. Okay, you're on your yachts, that sort of stuff,
Yes.
right, of course. And so that's when they try and air some of the busted pilots. They usually use it for summer season or series. Now, once the pilots were selected, they're tested and they're researched, believe it or not. They used to do the research by